The great central atrium of the Galactic University was a noisy and busy place. Beings of 100 different worlds moved through the wide space. Their voices, clicks, and hums mixed together into a constant sound. Lights from information screens shone on strange and wonderful bodies. There were tall, thin beings with long arms and short, wide beings with many eyes. The air smelled of ozone, strange spices, and the clean scent of the station's air systems. In the middle of all this was a girl named Ji-hyun. She was a human from Earth. She looked small and quiet next to many of the other students. Her hair was dark and straight, and her eyes were a soft brown. She wore simple, comfortable clothes in muted colors, and around her neck she always wore a soft gray scarf. Today, Ji-hyun was standing at a public information terminal. These terminals were made for everyone to use. But everyone often meant species with more than 2 hands, or with fingers that could bend in unusual ways, or with minds that could process many streams of information at once. Ji-hyun's problem was simple. The screen showed a complex menu that needed 3 different commands to be selected at the same time. For a species with 3 hands, this was easy. For Ji-hyun, with only 2 hands and 5 fingers on each, it was a difficult puzzle. She reached out, trying to press 2 points while aiming a third with her elbow. But the timing was wrong. The screen flashed red with an error message. A low, rumbling laugh sounded behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. It was Krax. He was a Varkonian, a species known for their size and strength. He stood nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in thick, greenish scales, and his head was like that of a large lizard, with a crest of bony spikes. His eyes, yellow and slitted, watched her with clear amusement. "Observe the mammal," Krax said, his voice deep and rough. He was talking to his companion, Valar. Valar was a slender, bird-like creature from the world of Sylth. His feathers were a glossy blue, and his head twitched in quick, sharp movements. Valar let out a series of chirping clicks that his translator box turned into words. "It is struggling with the basic interface. Its limbs are so limited." Krax took a heavy step closer, his shadow falling over Ji-hyun and the terminal. "It is a wonder its species mastered fire, let alone starflight. Look at it, so soft, so slow." Ji-hyun's shoulders tightened just a little. She did not turn around. She did not answer. She simply tried again, her fingers moving carefully across the glowing screen. She focused all her attention on the task, trying to block out their voices. "Perhaps it is cold," Valar chirped, tilting his head. "It always wears that fibrous neck wrap. Does it fear the climate systems? Is its homeworld so unstable?" This time Ji-hyun's hand instinctively went to her scarf. She pulled the soft fabric a little tighter, tucking it more securely under her chin. It was a small protective gesture. The scarf covered her neck completely from her jawline down to her collarbones. She kept her eyes fixed on the error message on the screen, hoping they would lose interest and go away. They did not. "Maybe it is a sign of weakness," Krax mused, leaning down so his head was closer to her level. His breath had a metallic smell, a sign that its species is not suited for space. They need extra protection from the simple air of a station. Just then, another student approached. This was Min-Soo, a human boy from the same exchange program as Ji-hyun. He had a friendly, open face and a determined look in his eyes. He had heard the mocking tones from across the walkway. "Leave her alone, Krax," Min-Soo said, his voice firm. He positioned himself slightly between Ji-hyun and the large alien. "We're all students here. There's no need for this." Krax straightened up to his full height, looking down at Min-Soo. "Ah, another one of the soft skins. Come to help your friend? Can she not speak for herself? Or is her mind as simple as her body?" "I can speak," Ji-hyun said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. But it was the first sound she had made. She still did not turn to face them. "Then tell us, little mammal," Krax said, his focus returning to her. "Why do you hide under that cloth? What are you so afraid of?" Min-Soo tried to help. He reached for the terminal. "Here, Ji-hyun, let me try. I think if we just—" But Ji-hyun shook her head. It was a small, almost invisible movement, but it was definite. She did not want his help. She took a slow step back from the terminal, away from Min-Soo, away from Krax and Valar. She had abandoned the task. Valar let out a triumphant chirp. "It gives up. It knows it is inferior." Krax laughed again, a sound like rocks grinding together. As expected. "Run along, little mammal. Go back to your simple world." Ji-hyun turned and walked away. She did not run. She did not hurry. Her walk was calm and steady, her head held straight. but the way she held her scarf with one hand keeping it tightly closed showed the tension she felt inside. The sound of their laughter followed her as she moved through the crowd and disappeared down a corridor. Min-soo watched her go, a frown on his face. He felt a mix of anger at the bullies and frustration with Ji-hyun. Why wouldn't she let him help? Why did she just take it? Later, he met his friend Chaewon in the food hall. The hall was filled with the smells of food from many planets. They found a quiet table away from a group of gelatinous beings who were absorbing their nutrient soup through their skin. It's just not right, Min-soo said, stirring his own bowl of broth. Krax and Valar were really nasty to her, and she just shut down, didn't say a word, didn't even look at them. Chaewon was a sharp and observant girl. She listened carefully, her eyes thoughtful. Ji-hyun, I've seen her in xenobotany. She's always by herself, and you're right about one thing. She always wears that scarf. Even in the botany labs, Min-soo agreed. The humidity and temperature in there are perfectly controlled for the plants. It's always warm and a little damp. Everyone else is in short sleeves, but she still has that scarf on. It doesn't make sense. Maybe it's not about being cold, Chaewon suggested softly. Maybe it's like a shield. Something she puts between herself and the rest of the universe. But a shield against what? Min-soo asked, his frustration returning. We're all here to learn. No one is going to hurt her. Chaewon just shrugged, her gaze distant. Maybe it's not a shield against being hurt. Maybe it's a shield for something else. Meanwhile, in her small personal quarters, Ji-hyun was alone. The room was neat and plain. It had a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out onto the star-filled blackness of space. She stood in front of the mirror on the wall. Her reflection showed a calm face, but her eyes held a deep, quiet intensity. She reached up and slowly touched the gray fabric of her scarf. Her fingers traced the line where it met her skin. She remembered the words. The words of her grandfather back on Earth before she left. His voice had been old and strong, like the roots of a mountain. The dragon is not a weapon to be shown in every fight, he had said. It is a promise of memory, a promise of protection. Its strength is for the moment when there is no other choice. Do not reveal it for petty insults. Do not reveal it for pride. Let them mock. Let them think you are weak. Your silence is your greatest armor. Your patience is your sharpest blade. In the mirror, her own eyes looked back at her, remembering. She saw not fear, but a deep, unyielding patience. She was following the old rule, the rule of the wardens. The rule of her family. She did not take the scarf off. Her hand fell away from it. She was not ready. The time was not right. The mockery in the atrium was just noise. It was not the moment for the dragon to wake. She turned from the mirror and sat at her desk, preparing to study. The incident was already forgotten by her. It was a small price to pay for keeping the promise. The frustration from the atrium stayed with Min-soo. He replayed the scene in his mind as he walked to his engineering lecture. Ji-hyun's silent retreat, the cruel laughter of the aliens, his own helplessness. It felt like a small defeat for all of humanity, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. His class was on high-gravity mechanics. The professor, a stout being from a heavy world, was demonstrating a pressure valve, but Min-soo's attention drifted. He found himself watching the other students. He saw how a student from a low-gravity world moved with careful, deliberate slowness under the artificial gravity. He saw how a species with 4 arms worked on a device with an easy, natural grace. Everyone had an adaptation. Everyone had a strength. So what was Ji-hyun's? Was her only strength to endure insults? After class, he went to the library archives. It was a vast, quiet space where the only sounds were the hum of servers and the soft whisper of climate control. He found a terminal and sat down. This time, he had no trouble with the interface. He was used to it now. He typed a search into the system. Human exchange students, Earth psychological profiles. The results were generic. They spoke of human resilience, adaptability, and a strong social drive. It didn't match the quiet, solitary girl he had seen. He tried another search. Human cultural artifacts, clothing, significance of scarves. This brought up many images. Scarves for warmth, for fashion, for religious purposes, for modesty. Nothing that explained why someone would wear one constantly in a climate-controlled environment. He leaned back in his chair, frustrated. Maybe Chaewon was right. Maybe it was just a personal shield, a comfort object. But something in the way Ji-hyun had carried herself, A stillness that felt more like control than fear told him there was more to it. Later that evening, he met Chaewon again. They were in a common area, watching a holographic display of a stellar nebula. Its colors shifted slowly, painting their faces in soft pinks and blues. "I tried to look her up," Min-soo said, not taking his eyes off the swirling gas clouds. "There's nothing. It's like she's a ghost. Maybe she just wants to be left alone," Chaewon replied. "Not everyone comes here to make friends, Min-soo. Some people just come to learn. But to take that kind of mockery and say nothing," he turned to her. "It makes us all look weak. It makes humans look like we can't stand up for ourselves." "Or," Chaewon said, her voice calm, "it makes us look like we have self-control. Maybe not reacting is a stronger move than getting into a fight you can't win. Cracks would break you in half. It's not about winning a fight," Min-soo argued, though he knew she was right about Cracks's strength. "It's about showing we have pride, dignity." "And who says she doesn't have dignity?" Chaewon asked. "Her dignity might be quiet. It might be internal. It might not need to perform for others." Her words silenced him for a moment. He hadn't thought of it that way. He had assumed that dignity was something you showed, something you defended loudly. The idea of a quiet, internal dignity was new to him. While Min-soo wrestled with these thoughts, Ji-hyun was in the xenobotany lab. It was her favorite place on the station. The air was warm and thick with the smell of damp soil and strange, sweet flowers. Giant leaves reached for the artificial sun lamps, and vines with bioluminescent flowers curled up the walls. She was tending to a delicate silver fern from a world with very low light. Her movements were slow and precise. She used a small spray bottle to mist its leaves with a nutrient solution. She did not wear gloves. Her bare hands, with their 5 simple fingers, worked with a gentle confidence that the plant seemed to respond to. The botany professor, a slow-moving plant-like being named Florian, watched her from across the room. His many leaf clusters rustled with approval. He had students with delicate tendrils and students with precise pincers, but few had Ji-hyun's intuitive touch for alien flora. She was completely focused on her task. In here with the plants, she was at peace. There was no mockery, no need for shields. The scarf around her neck felt less like armor and more like a simple piece of cloth. Her thoughts were far from Cracks and Valar. She was thinking about the lessons of her grandmother. Her grandmother had taught her about plants. She had taught her that true strength was not always fast and loud. A seed pushing through rock is strong. A tree growing for 1,000 years is strong. Their strength is in their patience, in their deep, silent connection to the world. This was a different kind of teaching from her grandfather's lessons about the dragon. But in her mind, they were connected. Both were about a power that was rooted, patient, and profound. She finished with the fern and moved to a different plant. This one was a small tree-like specimen with bark that felt like cool metal. As she reached up to check a leaf, the end of her scarf caught on a rough branch. She froze. It was a gentle tug, not enough to pull the scarf off. But it was a reminder of the line she walked every day between being herself and keeping her secret. She carefully unhooked the soft gray fabric, her heart beating just a little faster. She smoothed it back into place, ensuring it was secure. She saw Florian watching her. His large, photosensitive eyes blinked slowly. He did not speak, but in his quiet, plant-like way, he seemed to understand that the scarf was important. He gave a slight, respectful nod of his main stalk before turning back to his own work. Ji-hyun felt a small sense of relief. She was safe here. Her secret was safe. The next day, the incident in the atrium seemed to have been forgotten by everyone except Min-soo. He saw Ji-hyun in the food hall, sitting alone at a small table. She was reading from a data slate, eating a simple meal of rice and vegetables. He watched her for a moment. She was so still, so contained. It was like watching a pond with no ripples. He decided to try one more time. He walked over to her table. "Ji-hyun?" he said. She looked up from her data slate. Her eyes were calm, but they gave nothing away. "I just wanted to see if you were okay," Min-soo said. "After what happened yesterday with Cracks?" "I am fine," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You know you don't have to take that from them," he continued, sitting down without being invited. "There are rules. You can report them for harassment." A faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips for a second. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of someone who knew a secret he did not. "That is not the way," she said simply. "What way?" Minsu asked, leaning forward. What is the way? Just letting them think we're weak? What they think is not important, Ji-hyun said. She looked down at her data slate, effectively ending the conversation. Thank you for your concern. Minsu sat there for a moment, feeling dismissed. He had tried to be a friend, to stand up for her, and she was pushing him away. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Okay, he said, his voice tight with frustration. Okay, suit yourself. He walked away, leaving her to her meal and her silence. He felt like he had hit a wall. A soft, quiet, but very strong wall. That night in her quarters, Ji-hyun stood before the mirror again. The day played out in her mind. Minsu's frustrated face, the gentle tug of the scarf in the botany lab, the constant low hum of being an outsider. She raised her hands to the scarf. Her fingers found the knot at the back of her neck. For a long moment she just held it. She could untie it. She could let the fabric fall. For just a minute she could be free of its weight. She thought about Minsu's words. Just letting them think we're weak, he did not understand. The highest strength appears weak. The greatest fullness seems empty. Her grandfather's teachings echoed in her mind. The dragon does not need to roar to prove it is a dragon. Her hands lowered. She did not untie the scarf. The time for hiding was not over. The time for the secret was not now. The mockery was just noise. The frustration of a well-meaning boy was just a ripple on the surface. She turned from the mirror and began her meditation. She sat on the floor, back straight, hands resting on her knees. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. In the quiet of her mind, she could feel it. A presence, a patient, coiled energy resting just under her skin, waiting. It was not time for it to wake. Not yet. Her silence was not weakness. It was a choice, and she would keep choosing it until the moment when choice was no longer an option. The air in the xenoarchaeology lecture hall was cool and still. Professor Cathar, a being who looked like a stack of intelligent talking rocks, stood at the front. His voice was a low grind that filled the room. Today's topic was ancient starship disasters and survival protocols. Ji-hyun sat near the back, as always. She took notes on her data slate, her handwriting neat and precise. Minsu and Chaewon were a few rows ahead. Krax and Valar were on the other side of the room. Minsu could feel the large alien's presence like a dark cloud. Professor Cathar finished his lecture. The main lights came up. Now, the professor grumbled, for the practical application. You will be divided into teams for a simulation. The scenario is a derelict starship, the SS Endurance. Gravity is failing. Atmosphere is leaking. Systems are critical. A wave of excited chatter went through the room. Practical exams were worth a large part of their grade. The professor began to assign teams using the university's random system. Minsu found himself placed with Chaewon and two other students from a silicon-based species. He felt a wave of relief. Then he saw the next grouping flash on the screen. His relief vanished. Krax's team was listed. And right below it, the system had added Ji-hyun to Minsu's team. A deep rumbling laugh cut through the noise. Krax stood up, his large frame drawing every eye. He pointed a thick clawed finger directly at Minsu. This is perfect, Krax announced. His yellow eyes glinted. I challenge the mammals. My team versus yours. Let us see if your famous human ingenuity can compensate for your physical weakness in a real crisis. The hall went quiet. This was not normal. Challenges happened, but they were usually friendly. This was a public humiliation. Minsu felt his face grow warm. He stood up, trying to look confident. Fine, he said, his voice a little too loud. We accept your challenge. Krax's smile was wide and full of sharp teeth. He looked over Minsu's team. His gaze settled on Ji-hyun, who was still sitting quietly, her data slate now dark. Good, Krax said. And the quiet one with the cloth hide comes too. I want to see her panic when the environment fails. I want to see how her scarf helps her then. All eyes turned to Ji-hyun. She did not look up. She did not react. She simply placed her data slate into her bag and stood. She smoothed down her simple tunic and adjusted the gray scarf around her neck. The gesture was so calm it seemed unnatural. She finally lifted her head and looked across the room. Not at Minsu, not at Chaewon. She looked directly at Krax. Her face showed no fear, no anger. It was a blank, peaceful mask. Then she gave a single, slow nod. It was not a nod of acceptance to Minsu. It was a nod to Krax, a silent answer to his challenge. The two teams were led out of the lecture hall and toward the simulation deck. Minsu walked quickly to fall into step with Ji-hyun. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice tight with stress. "You didn't have to agree. We could have refused the challenge." Ji-hyun kept walking, her eyes forward. "A challenge was made," she said, her voice barely audible. "An answer was required. But he's only doing this to bully you. To bully all of us. Then he will be disappointed," she replied. There was no emotion in her words. It was a simple statement of fact. Chaewon caught up to them. She looked worried. The SS endurance simulation is one of the hardest. The gravity fluctuations are random. The air gets thick with coolant vapor. It's designed to test species under extreme stress. "We'll be fine," Minsu said, trying to sound brave. "We'll stick together. We'll use our brains." They reached the massive doors of the simulation chamber. It was a huge circular room that could mimic many different environments. Today it was configured as the wrecked interior of a starship. Through the thick observation window they could see dark corridors, sparking wires and flashing red alarm lights. Krax's team was already putting on their environment suits. The suits were standard for the simulation, providing basic protection and a comms link. Krax slammed his fist against his chest plate. "No suit needed for a Varkonian," he boasted. "Our scales are better than this synthetic skin." Minsu's team put on their suits. The material was flexible and sealed itself around them. Ji-hyun put hers on with the same quiet efficiency she did everything. The suit's high collar covered her scarf completely. A technician gave them their instructions. "The goal is to reach the safe zone at the bridge of the ship. Your teams will start from different points. The environment will become more dangerous the longer you take. Good luck," the heavy doors hissed open. The sounds of blaring alarms and sparking electricity spilled out. The air that washed over them was cold and smelled of metal and smoke. Krax grinned at them. "Try not to get lost, mammals." He then led his team into the dark, flickering maze. Minsu took a deep breath. He looked at his team. Chaewon, his smart and reliable friend, the two silicon-based students who were communicating with each other in soft, clicking sounds, and Ji-hyun, the quiet, mysterious girl who was now a liability he had to protect. "Okay," Minsu said, activating his helmet's light. "Let's stick together. Let's move carefully." They stepped into the simulation. The door sealed behind them with a final, heavy thud. They were locked in. The test had begun. The first challenge was a long corridor with a cracked power conduit snaking along the wall. Sparks flew out at random intervals. They had to time their movements to avoid the bursts of energy. Minsu took the lead. "Wait for my signal," he said. He watched the pattern of the sparks. "Now go!" Chaewon and the two silicon students rushed past the danger point. Minsu turned to Ji-hyun. She was standing still, watching the sparks. She wasn't waiting for his signal. She was calculating her own. "Ji-hyun, come on," Minsu urged. She ignored him. As a large spark fizzled out, she took 3 quick, light steps and was past the conduit without any hurry or panic. She moved with a dancer's grace. Minsu shook his head in confusion and followed. They reached a large room that must have been a cargo bay. Parts of the floor were missing, showing a dark pit below. And then the gravity failed. One moment Minsu was standing firmly. The next he was floating, his feet off the ground. A cry of surprise escaped his lips. He flailed his arms, trying to orient himself. Chaewon was also floating, grabbing for a handhold. The two silicon students were better adapted. They used their heavier, denser bodies to push themselves slowly toward the other side, grabbing onto fixed pipes. And Ji-hyun? She was calm. As the gravity shifted, she simply tucked her body into a ball, rotated smoothly, and extended a hand to catch a hanging cable. She used the momentum to pull herself toward the next safe platform. It was not the movement of someone who was scared. It was the movement of someone who had trained for this. Just as quickly, the gravity returned, twice as strong as normal. Minsu grunted as he was slammed into the floor. The heavy pull was exhausting. He struggled to get to his feet. Across the room, he saw Krax's team. They were using their brute strength, forcing their way through the high gravity, knocking aside debris. They were making faster progress, but it was messy and loud. Krax saw Minsu's team struggling. He laughed, the sound distorted through the comms. "Is it too heavy for you, little mammals? Your bones must be shaking." Minsu gritted his teeth and pushed forward. He didn't have the energy to reply. He was too focused on moving. He glanced back at Ji-hyun. She was walking, her steps measured and sure as if she were simply walking up a steep hill. Her breathing was even. Her expression was still calm. They finally made it through the cargo bay and into a narrower maintenance tunnel. The alarms were louder here. A new warning light flashed on their suit displays. Coolant leak detected, a automated voice said in their helmets. Atmospheric opacity increasing. A white, freezing vapor began to pour from vents in the ceiling. It was like a thick fog, covering everything. Within seconds, Min-soo could barely see Chae-won, who was right next to him. "I can't see," Chae-won said, her voice tense. "My visor is icing over." "Everyone stay close," Min-soo ordered, his own visor clouding with the condensation. "Link arms." He reached out blindly. He felt Chae-won's arm. He felt the hard, cool arm of one of the Silicon students. He reached for where Ji-hyun should be. His gloved hand flailed in the fog. He lost his balance on the uneven floor. He stumbled forward, falling. As he fell, his hand caught on something. He grabbed it instinctively, trying to stop his fall. It was Ji-hyun. His hand had snagged on the collar of her environment suit right at her neck. He pulled hard, trying to right himself. There was a tearing sound. The seal of her suit collar, stressed by his pull, came loose, and the scarf underneath, caught in the sudden movement, was pulled away from her neck. Min-soo landed on his knees on the cold floor. He looked up, his iced visor making everything a blur. But just then, the emergency lights in the tunnel began to strobe. Bright white flashes pierced the thick vapor. In one of those brilliant frozen flashes of light, Min-soo saw it. The scarf was pulled aside. On the skin of Ji-hyun's neck and collarbone, there was a tattoo. But it was like no tattoo he had ever seen. The ink was a deep, shimmering black, but it seemed to have light inside it. It swirled and moved like living smoke. It was the form of a dragon. A long, powerful serpentine creature coiled around her neck. Its eye, a point of fierce, intelligent light, seemed to look right at him. The whole thing glowed with a faint internal fire, a light that came from under her skin. It was there for less than a second. Ji-hyun reacted with lightning speed. She snatched the scarf and pulled it back into place, covering the glowing mark. She fixed her suit collar, her movements sharp and definite. The strobe lights continued to flash. The thick vapor still hid them, but Min-soo had seen it. He knelt on the floor, stunned, his mind unable to process what his eyes had just witnessed. He had not seen a quiet, weak girl. He had seen something ancient, something powerful. He had seen a dragon. Min-soo knelt on the cold floor, his mind reeling. The image of the glowing dragon was burned into his eyes. It was not a simple tattoo. It was alive. It had moved. He was sure of it. The fierce intelligence in that single shining eye had looked right through him. The thick, freezing vapor swirled around him. He could hear Chae-won calling his name, her voice muffled and distant through the fog and the iced-over comms. "Min-soo, where are you? Are you okay?" He couldn't answer. His throat was tight. He looked up at Ji-hyun. She had finished securing her scarf and her suit. She was no longer the quiet girl he thought he knew. In the flashing strobe lights, her silhouette seemed different, taller. She stood perfectly still, but it was the stillness of a predator before it strikes. Then, she moved. She did not fumble or feel her way through the fog. She walked forward with a sudden absolute purpose. Her head was up. Her eyes, though he could not see them, seemed to pierce the white gloom. She had no need for helmet lights or linked arms. She could see. She walked past him, her hand brushing his shoulder. It was not a gentle touch. It was a signal. "Follow." Min-soo scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. "Chae-won," he yelled into his comm. "This way."
"Follow my voice."
He stumbled after Ji-hyun's retreating form, calling for the others. Chae-won and the two Silicon students blundered out of the fog, their visors covered in a crust of ice. They clung to each other, following the sound of Min-soo's voice. Ji-hyun led them to a control panel on the wall. It was dark and dead. The coolant leak had shorted it out. Min-soo stared at it, helpless. "It's no use. It's dead. We're trapped in here." Ji-hyun did not listen. She placed her gloved hands on the panel. She wasn't looking for buttons. Her fingers traced the seams of the metal casing. Then she made a fist and slammed the side of her hand hard against a specific point near the top. The blow was sharp and precise, a martial arts strike. A hidden maintenance hatch popped open, revealing a set of manual override switches and a crank. Min-soo stared in disbelief. How did you know that was there? Ji-hyun did not answer. She began turning the crank. It was stiff and heavy, but she moved it with a steady, powerful rhythm. With each turn, a heavy grinding sound echoed through the tunnel. A blast door ahead of them, which they hadn't even seen in the fog, began to slowly retract into the ceiling. The vapor in their section began to thin, sucked out by the changing pressure. As it cleared, they saw what was on the other side of the door. It was Krax's team. They were in a terrible state. They were trapped in a small section of corridor, sealed in by a glowing red containment field. Krax was roaring with fury, pounding his fists against the energy barrier. It was clear he had triggered it by accident in his blind rage. Valar was fluttering nervously, his feathers puffed up. They saw Min-Soo's team appear through the clearing fog. Krax stopped pounding. His yellow eyes widened in shock. He had not expected to see them. He had thought they were lost, frozen in the vapor. His eyes moved from Min-Soo to the person who had saved them. He looked at Ji-hyun. She stood by the open control panel, her hand still on the crank. Her breathing was even. Her scarf was perfectly in place. She looked back at him. There was no smile, no glare. Her face was a calm, unreadable mask. But in that moment, her silence was louder than any of Krax's roars. She had done what he could not. She had found a way through. Ji-hyun turned from Krax and walked to the console controlling the containment field. It was a standard design. She pressed a sequence of buttons. There was no hesitation. She didn't need to look up the codes. She just knew. The red field flickered and died. Krax and his team stumbled out. They were humbled and silent. The mockery was gone from their faces, replaced by a stunned confusion. They looked at Ji-hyun not with contempt, but with a new wary respect. "The safe zone is this way," Ji-hyun said. Her voice was the same quiet tone as always, but now it carried a weight of authority that made everyone listen. She pointed down a corridor to the left. She began to walk, not waiting to see if they followed. After a moment's hesitation, both teams, former rivals, fell into step behind her. Krax and his team walked at the back, their heads down. The rest of the journey was simple. Ji-hyun led them through the wrecked ship with an unerring sense of direction. She pointed out unstable floor panels before anyone stepped on them. She identified a live power conduit that was hidden in the shadows. She was not just a student anymore. She was a guide. They reached the door to the bridge, the safe zone. It slid open with a hiss, revealing a clean, well-lit room. The simulation was over. The normal lights of the simulation chamber came on, bright and harsh. The sounds of alarms cut off, leaving a ringing silence. The team stood blinking in the sudden calm. Professor Cathar was waiting for them, his rocky face impossible to read. "An interesting performance," he grumbled. "Team Min-Soo, successful. Team Krax, successful, but only due to external assistance." Krax shuffled his feet but said nothing. He could not argue. The professor's stony gaze settled on Ji-hyun. "Your knowledge of obscure ship systems is notable. Your file did not mention engineering training." Ji-hyun simply bowed her head slightly. The group filed out of the chamber, removing their environment suits. The mood was strange. There were no cheers, no talk of victory. The other students from both teams looked at Ji-hyun with sideways glances, unsure of what to say. Min-Soo could not take his eyes off her. The memory of the dragon was burning in his mind. He had to know. He waited until they were in a quieter corridor, away from the main group. Chaewon was with him, Ji-hyun, he said, his voice low. "Wait!" She stopped and turned to face them. Her expression was still calm, but now he could see the depth in her eyes. He saw the patience and the power that had always been there. "What was that?" Min-Soo asked, gesturing back toward the simulation chamber. "How did you know how to do all that?" And what I saw in the fog," and Chaewon looked at him, confused. "What did you see?" Ji-hyun looked from Min-Soo's desperate face to Chaewon's curious one. She understood that the time for silence was over. The secret was out, at least to them. She reached up and for the first time in front of anyone, she slowly, deliberately pulled her scarf aside. There was no strobe light now. Under the steady white light of the corridor, the tattoo was dark. It was the deep, rich black of a night sky, but as they watched, the pigment seemed to swirl like ink in water. The lines of the dragon were elegant and fierce, coiled protectively around her neck. It did not glow, but it seemed to hold a latent energy, a promise of light. Min-Soo stared, his breath caught in his throat. It was even more beautiful and terrifying in the clear light. Ji-hyun's voice was soft, but it filled the hallway. On my world, she began, a dragon does not mean brutality. It represents wisdom, strength, the guardianship of profound knowledge. She touched the tattoo gently. This marks me as a warden. My people do not send our soldiers to learn among the stars. We send our historians, our rememberers. She looked at Min-soo, her gaze steady. Our strength is not for showing off. It is for remembering, for enduring, and for protecting what matters when the time is right. She let the scarf fall back into place, hiding the dragon once more. The simple, quiet girl was back. But now they knew the truth. The quiet was a choice. The scarf was a door, and behind it was a power they could barely understand. You have not seen human ingenuity, she said to them, a small, knowing smile finally touching her lips. You have only seen our patience. The news of what happened in the simulation spread through the university like a quiet wave. There were no loud announcements, no dramatic retellings. But people knew. They saw the way Krax and his team now walked with less swagger. They saw the way they would glance at Ji-hyun from a distance, not with mockery, but with a new, careful respect. The change was most clear a few days later in the central atrium. Min-soo and Chae-won were there, and they saw Ji-hyun approach the same public terminal that had caused her so much trouble before. This time, Krax and Valar were standing nearby. They saw Ji-hyun. They watched her, but they did not laugh. They did not speak. They simply watched, their bodies still. Ji-hyun reached the terminal. She worked the interface with the same careful, two-handed technique as before. It was still slow. It was still not designed for a human. She was not suddenly a master of the machine, but something was different. She did not pull her scarf tighter. She did not look at the floor. She held her head high. Her movements, while slow, were filled with a new confidence. She was no longer trying to hide. She was simply being herself. She finished her task and turned to leave. As she did, her eyes met Krax's across the hall. The large alien did not look away in challenge. Instead, he gave a slow, single nod. It was the same nod she had given him before the simulation. It was a sign of acknowledgement. Of truce, Ji-hyun returned the nod just once. Then she walked away, her steps calm and steady. Min-soo let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It's over, he said to Chae-won. No, Chae-won replied, her eyes thoughtful. It's different. Later they found Ji-hyun in the botany lab. She was misting the silver fern, her hands gentle on its leaves. She seemed more at peace than they had ever seen her. The air of tension that always surrounded her was gone. Can we talk? Min-soo asked, his voice hesitant. Ji-hyun looked up and smiled. It was a small, real smile. Yes, they found a quiet bench among the glowing flowers. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the gentle hum of the life support systems. Min-soo finally broke the silence. I'm sorry, he said. I thought you were weak. I was wrong. Ji-hyun shook her head. You were not wrong to want to help a friend. Your heart was in the right place. You just did not understand my way. Your way is difficult to understand, Chae-won said softly. To let people think less of you. It goes against everything we're taught. That is because our lessons are different, Ji-hyun explained. She looked at the flowers around them. You are taught to be like this flower, bright and open to show your beauty to the world. This is a good way. She pointed to a large, ancient-looking tree in the corner of the lab. Its roots were thick and strong, digging deep into the soil. My family is taught to be like that tree. Our strength is not for showing. It is in our roots. In our memory! We stand through storms because we are patient and because we remember every storm that has come before. So the dragon, Min-soo began. The dragon is our reminder, Ji-hyun said. It is a promise to remember. To remember our history, our knowledge, our duty to protect it. We do not use it for small fights or for pride. We save it for the moments when memory and protection are all that matter. And the simulation was one of those moments? Chae-won asked. Ji-hyun nodded. It became one. When others were in danger, when the challenge was real, not just words, then it was time to remember what I knew. It was time to protect. Min-soo thought about this. He thought about all the times he had gotten into arguments trying to prove a point. He thought about his frustration with Ji-hyun's silence. He saw now that her strength was of a different kind. A deeper kind. Will you tell us more? He asked. About being a warden? About your home? Ji-hyun looked at them. She saw their honest faces. They were not asking out of fear or mere curiosity. They were asking as friends. Yes, she said, I will. And so she began to tell them stories. She told them of Earth, but not the Earth they knew from the news feeds. She told them of quiet places, of ancient temples hidden in mountains, of libraries that held books made of paper. She spoke of a history not of great battles but of great thoughts, of philosophy and art and the slow, patient accumulation of wisdom. She explained that the wardens were not soldiers. They were keepers. Their purpose was to travel and to learn, to gather the stories of the galaxy and to remember them, so that nothing would be lost, so that knowledge would not disappear. The galaxy is full of species who are strong in body or fast in mind, she said. But humanity's gift is different. Our gift is time. We think in long years. We plan for generations we will never meet. The dragon reminds us to look at the long path, not just the step in front of us. As she spoke, Min-soo and Chae-won began to understand. The scarf was not a shield of fear. It was a veil of responsibility. She was not hiding herself. She was guarding a sacred trust. Days turned into weeks. The dynamic at the university had shifted. Ji-hyun was still quiet. She still kept to herself much of the time. But she was no longer an outcast. She was a mystery and a respected one. She began to spend more time with Min-soo and Chae-won. They studied together. They ate meals together. They were her first real friends at the university. One evening, they were all on the observation deck looking out at the stars. The galaxy was a vast, beautiful swirl of light. It's strange, Min-soo said. I used to look out there and see a place to conquer, to prove ourselves. Ji-hyun stood beside him, her scarf fluttering softly in the recycled air. And what do you see now? He thought for a moment. I see stories, I see a library, and we're not here to shout our own story the loudest. We're here to listen to all the others. Ji-hyun smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile. You are beginning to understand. She turned from the window and looked at her two friends. Thank you, she said. For what? Chae-won asked. For your patience, Ji-hyun replied, and for your friendship. It is good not to be alone with the memory. She reached up and in the privacy of their company she loosened her scarf just a little. She did not take it off. The dragon remained her secret, her responsibility, but she no longer had to hide its truth from everyone. She had found people she could trust. She had found her place. She was Ji-hyun. She was a student. She was a friend. And she was a warden, a rememberer for all of humanity. The dragon on her neck was quiet, its job done for now. It would sleep and wait, until the time came for it to shine again.